On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Shashank Tiwari. He is the co-founder and CEO of uno.ai. We're going to be talking about AI and closing the skill gap in cybersecurity. A lot of challenges. We always hear about the number of job openings out there within cybersecurity. How can AI help? And where do we see the gains? Where are those opportunities? Where will Copilot kind of slipstream into the workflow? Shashank, I'm super excited to have you on to talk about all this.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Amir. Really excited to be here, and the topic is certainly dear to my heart. So very happy to share our learnings and how we are viewing the world and the market around it.
Absolutely. Before we start, just to kind of set the expectation, what does your company uno.ai do?
Yeah, we are a young startup. 2 years and a change. Started fall of 2021, based out of Palo Alto, California. Sort of the flag bearers of this Copilot mission, in a way. We got started with the ambition to build an AI cyber Copilot before the current sort of mass revolution, if you may, started with the emergence of ChatGPT, and we were very convinced and very committed that an intelligent machine would make a difference, and the time is now to build one. So we started down that journey, and 2 years we have worked aggressively towards a point where we have a general availability platform, early customers, lots of great progress in terms of technology. And of course, learning every day as we are interacting with customers on one side and innovating on the product on the other.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's dive into the topic. I think everyone at some point has seen the headlines of the number of X million cybersecurity job openings. I don't think there's a secret. There's a lot of demand, not as many qualified individuals. I guess before we dive into the AI component and talking about that, I mean, let's talk about that current challenge, because it strikes me that's a big number. But I also talk to people within cybersecurity and realize that while that number is big, the number of actual qualified candidates that are considered is a lot smaller. Hence, we have, 4 or 5, 6 jobs per available resource. Like, when you're looking at that challenge, it's very hard in security to hire somebody that just doesn't have experience. Is that what you're seeing?
Oh, 100%. In fact, I think the problem is worse. And I'll tell you why. There are two reasons for it. One that you already sort of, described, which is more jobs to be filled, lesser qualified people, and, the obvious gap between the two numbers. But also the second part of the story, which is often not discussed in mass media, but, when you speak to the folks who are in this profession, they certainly discuss it and talk about it, and which is really around the fact that the landscape is changing super rapidly, right? Like cyber is an ever evolving field for multiple reasons, right? Threat vectors are increasing, priorities are changing, it's becoming more and more important. The rapid digitization is kind of putting pressure in that field. And not everyone who's in the field is able to even keep pace with that change, right? So there is also a sort of building skill gap in terms of just staying relevant, staying on top of things, knowing all the different pieces of the puzzle that you need to know to do your job well. And that gap is also widening, right? So in other words, you've got not enough people to do the job, and even the people who are there, they're sort of struggling to be on top of things. And so the way the market really looks is this very power law sort of playing in this market. Certainly there are a very small set of people, small percentage of people who are able to be on top of these things, who are at the leading edge, and you hear from them talking about advanced threats and how we could do in terms of the next generation of cybersecurity posture management and active defense and all those good things. But really, the masses, when you look at the broader sets of players, there is lots to be done, right? That gap is big, and the gap is widening. So the problem is big, right? So I certainly hear that, and I think the way I also look at it, there's another sort of nuance to it, is that those who are in the field, because of this widening gap and because of all the pressure, are certainly getting stressed out, right? Certainly being stretched beyond their comfort zone because they're expected to step up and expected to step up at a pace that they may have not signed up for in the first place, right? So there's a bit of that as well, just kind of frustration, fatigue building because of the rising expectation. And then, of course, they're doing the best, trying to be on top of things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I hear, I own a recruiting company, and I hear a lot of times when it comes to security roles that people, CISOs, like to hire people do they have direct work experience? I mean, it's such a trust-centric industry, obviously, and they want to know that people are coming in that know what to do, how to build the program the way they want. And it's very tough because they all also then want to work with that same subset of people. Obviously, you get that mental burnout, all those components you're talking about. Shifting the gears to talk about AI. I mean, we see the products in the market. We see AI is being incorporated within cybersecurity. We see Microsoft, all the big companies are seeing its potential area where they can help with threats. When you're looking at AI and how it might help address some of the skill gap in cybersecurity, how far does that potentially, like, what's the scope? Like, is it a, hey, we're going to really have AI based cybersecurity hands off, co-pilot? It's there just to help do some of the mundane tasks. At what level are we potentially looking at?
Yeah, the promise is big. I truly believe, and I think that was the reason why we doubled down and started the company in the first place. That I think purely from a future sort of crystal ball gazing standpoint, right? We have miles to cover, and I think we are headed in the right direction. When I say we, I'm not just talking about we as Uno or we as uno.ai, the company, but the larger sort of industry, right? Like we have now started innovating at a much faster pace in terms of AI. The power of the modern generation AI, broadly kind of driven by the rise of large language models and the so-called generative AI. But of course, there are multiple other pieces of the broader AI landscape. They have certainly revived interest, revived enthusiasm around what AI can do. And I do feel that over a period of time, we will get to a point where AI would start supplementing us as humans and start taking on a lot of the core sort of human centric activities around decision making, around sort of proactively doing what humans are unable to scale up to, and then essentially bridging all these gaps that exist today in the workforce. Now, where are we today? Are we there yet? I think there's lots of work to be done. We're not there yet. So I think what you will end up seeing is sort of the initial versions of those, right, which will manifest in the form of force multipliers, the co-pilots, if you may, which will manifest in the form of enablers that would start taking away some things off your plate, right? For example, a lot of time is spent today, if we get more specific in terms of the world of cybersecurity, in just simply collecting everything and correlating things and enriching it and understanding the context. And so a lot of that sort of tedious work would certainly get automated out using modern generation AI. And then in addition to it, a lot of the other complex activity that involves a lot of reading and parsing and making sense and mapping, especially let's say if you take an area like governance and risk, right, or active vulnerability assessment, it also involves a whole lot of sort of reading language, assessing it, looking at vendor notes, understanding external advisory, looking at the regulatory frameworks, and sort of making judgment and decision basis what those are pointing an analyst towards. So a lot of that language centric tasks would also get automated out using AI. So both of these sort of things off the plate would start sort of getting done by AI, and then it would start coming in as a co-pilot and a force multiplier. And it sort of will lend itself towards that ultimate goal of it being our colleague, if you may, if I were to use the word loosely, right? Like we'll be humans working, and then alongside there'll be AI as well.
When you look at adoption, obviously, every group has to feel comfortable with the results, right? Obviously, ChatGPT is a very big example of Gen AI and what people are starting to associate with the product, with the space. It's brought a lot of awareness. There's questions about the value of the answer, right? You have to be able to interpret the answer to be able to understand whether it is actually what you want. Because if you copy and paste it, we've all seen the memes and stories about that not working. When you look at adoption in cybersecurity and AI, what do CISOs typically have to see to feel comfortable through a pilot that, hey, this is something that I can see doing these tasks? Is there like trends or some observations you have?
Oh yeah, 100%. So just firstly, echoing in on what you said, there is a lot of resistance and skepticism. I think like many CISOs are enthusiastic, but also starting from that position, typically like that's where they're at. The reason they're there is because of some reasons that you already illustrated. Hallucination and not able to trust what these systems are doing, especially in the Gen AI space. But also, I think there are two other pieces which worries them. One is the fact that, hey, is this going to become my, new security hole, right? Like, is this instead of helping me end up becoming my trouble point, right? That would be the point from where I would leak data or sensitive information, or I'd start getting into another sort of newer attack vector. So that certainly is also front and center. Something that they are trying to think through and kind of build a little thesis around and sort of contain it and proactively manage it, right? So there's one of that. And then not to forget that over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, the industry, and I think I would partially blame the vendors as well, have oversold the promise of AI/ML, right? So what has really ended up happening is that the promise has been so oversold that oftentimes, even when we have made advancements over the last few years, at least in the the eyes of the user, the eyes of the buyer, it has not really met expectations, because hey, you promised me the moon, and all I got was a little bit of a nice flight up there where I could see Earth from down there. I was not even close to the moon, right? So so that's the whole sort of gap also in terms of expectation versus reality. So they do come from a point of skepticism, right? And they do come from a point of fear to an extent, right? The fear of the unknown. So what we have seen is that in these situations, there are two things that work very well, right? At least it seems to work for us, and this is where we find fruitful conversations, valuable conversations, and something that CISOs really like, enjoy, and can engage around. One is very clear proof of value. So you don't worry so much about the technology as much as what are the benefits of using it. What exactly can we do? Is it measurable? How do we see it, right? So if you're able to show that value in terms of either increase in speed or increase of efficiency, or meaningful progress in terms of a task, then I think there is definitely buy-in. That's something that's measurable, and usually, at least, we engage in a lot of POVs where we lead by that conversation. We almost go with the assumption, we almost go with that thesis saying, well, why don't you see it? If you don't like it, and if the proof of value is not clear, do not engage, right? Like, because we want you to be completely in and take advantage of this, but obviously you need to see the proof, right? The proof is in the pudding, kind of, as the saying goes, right? And so so I think that definitely is important for CISOs, and I think they're very hungry with that sort of appetite to go and see see and touch and feel and really kind of experience the difference, right? So that's one part. And then the second part is also around proactively working with CISOs on the AI governance, I would kind of call it broadly, the sort of security for AI, or making AI safe and secure to use, along with AI governance and controls around it. So we tend to also now have those conversations sooner, instead of CISOs eventually asking like, hey, how secure is your AI system? What may be the weaknesses? Can that become my sort of Achilles heel, if you may? What we try to address that upfront is the, well, you know what, let's first enumerate that. Let's first make sure we're on the same page in terms of why and what type of controls that we put in place seem to be meaningful, and will protect us in the times to come, and what are the unknowns, because it's not like every single type of attack possible, but what are the unknowns. And therefore, when we go on this journey together, you're not going with the mindset and with the knowledge that, hey, I will just figure everything out. You figured a bunch of it out, and yes, what are some of the things that we still need to sort of learn together and figure stuff out, and maybe even evolve, right, as we adopt these systems. So I think both of these sort of AI governance, I would call it loosely, and then of course clear POV, clear value, is certainly, I think, a winner in this market. And that's where you will start seeing CISOs at large, and I would assume most leaders at large, right, like enterprise IT leaders, beginning to then be more open to the idea of giving these powerful systems a try, right, kind of working with it.
Yeah, those are some great points. And I guess, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about the co-pilot component to this. And even when it comes to ChatGPT or similar tools, you have to evaluate that answer. And as we're looking at, I guess we're talking about AI closing the skill gap in cybersecurity. If you still need some of that specialized intelligence to be able to interpret the results of an AI solution, the co-pilot, to give you guidance. I guess the efficiency gains will allow people to become multiple in terms of efforts because you are not actually interpreting every signal yourself. You have a AI to help bring your attention to what you should focus on. So I guess that will allow you to be that efficiency gain. How and again, this might be just we're talking about what could be down the road, but as you kind of see adoption of these tools, what will happen to the bar required in terms of specialized skills within cyber? Is there still going to need to be a core to be able to understand as a more of an analyst, or more from the practitioner engineering side of security?
Yeah, great questions. And a couple of topics which I'm sure they're not absolute answers, but worth surmising over, right? Worth sort of discussing and trying to look at, sort of peeling the onion, if you may, on that bigger question. So the way I think about this, Amir, is there are two aspects that I think one needs to consider. Firstly, today, right, like right away as we start engaging with copilots. The first that there is certainly a gap in terms of explainability or analysis of the results that these systems are presenting to an analyst, as an example, right, or to a particular cybersecurity professional, whatever they're indulging in, whether it's a security incident that they're trying to analyze, or whether they are trying to complete a risk and compliance centric task, or they are trying to simply go and do a threat analysis of something. In each of these tasks, the system is going to present some options, it's going to present some analysis. And I think you bring a good point, is like, one, what kind of skills do I need to even understand that analysis, firstly? And then secondly, can I trust it, right? And how do I trust it? And those are great questions, because what it's saying, in other words, is that, well, we'll need two types of things alongside. One is a certain level of skill, right, or a certain level of user interface that makes this information accessible, right, so that you can actually take advantage of whatever the system is doing, right? And I think you probably need both, right? You need easy ways to kind of consume it, easy ways to understand it in context. So it's definitely the user experience part of the story will become front and center as these systems become more and more mainstream. And then, of course, the other part that they should be in a way that aligns with the skills of the person. And in some cases, that would also mean not only the system becoming adjusting to the person, but the person adjusting to the system, right? Where you need a certain levels of skills, or certain types of background, or a certain level of training to make best use of what the system is trying to present to you, right? Now, alongside there is also, like I mentioned, the other dimension, which is around trusting it. So, okay, it's giving me an analysis, it's telling me something that's useful. Well, how do I trust it, right? And trust, of course, also can be parsed in multiple different ways. Again, like I said earlier, these are the things, ideas to think about. I don't think there's an absolute clear answer yet. And you can think of it in a couple of ways. One way to think about it is like, well, reconciling back to source, or showing the explainable aspects of why the system is saying what it's saying, will certainly increase trust, right? And we try to do that, by the way, in our system as well. We try to make sure that we have an explainable component to what the system does or says or recommends, saying, hey, here is why the system is saying this, and if you want to do so, you can go back and look at the source document or the source piece of information, right? And that's just one sort of baby step in the direction of explainability and just understanding why the system is doing what it's doing. Now, having said that, many of these systems are big black boxes. It's very hard to get to that fine-grained level of explainability just by design, right? Neural nets are complex systems, right? Which is difficult, even mathematically and system-wise, to go and understand why it's doing what it's doing necessarily, right? Like, you can't take every single piece and go back to its fine-grained origins. Now, last but not the least to this is the fact that there's also the dichotomy that what it's giving you, right, like the source, not only is it explainable, but it is the correct one. Like, the analysis for some reason has the right fidelity, it has the right accuracy, it has the right level of coverage, right? For example, like, to make it more specific, if the system is doing some sort of an alert analysis, you have to assume and believe that the system did look at all the different pieces of information and understood the context properly and drew out the correlations in the correct way and was able to go down to the root cause in a way that an expert would do otherwise, right? That somehow the system was able to do that. And sometimes getting to that point is easier said than done, right? Like, why is the system doing what it's doing? I'm sure even as humans, we can't explain half the times what we are doing. forget the system kind of getting to that point, right? So there are some of those challenges for sure.
And that's interesting. And I think when you're obviously some of this stuff is going to be resolved. And I was actually thinking about obviously ChatGPT is a single response. You can obviously ask it to revise its answers, but you get a single response. As a co-founder, CEO of a AI-based security product, you mentioned visualization. It's kind of left field, but I'm curious if your thoughts. How important is that becoming for you and the organization? Because before it was good just to bring a solution to the table and meet the solution, meet the needs. The UI obviously is important within the space of AI with what ChatGPT has presented to us as we type into this interface, we get this response back. How much, I guess, does the UI now weigh in terms of somebody who's responsible for making sure that adoption piece is optimal?
Another fantastic question, right? And I think this is something that everybody should think about. So we thought about this early, right? And I think we thought about this early, not so much from a foresight standpoint, but from a standpoint of how do we surface the power of our system, right? And I think that was the first quest. And what occurred or what happened because of that question, if you may, that we asked ourselves was to invest heavily in user interface. So we did realize early on that I think user experience, user interface, and also the way that a user would interact with these systems is going to be of paramount importance, right? And there are, again, if you look at it, sort of double click on it or, think further down that path, there is a certain precedent that, of course, ChatGPT has set with a conversational interface. Like you ask the system questions and the question gives you answers, right? Like the system gives you answers. So certainly there is that conversational interface part of the story, but I think there is a lot more to it than simply conversational interface. For example, in some cases, perhaps you don't want to chat with the system, right? Because if you really think about enterprise applications, it will be analogous to being on a customer support call all day long, which nobody will enjoy, right? So how about just like giving some tasks to the system and letting the system take over and do the task, and once it's complete, it comes back and tells me, like, gives me a report, helps me understand whether the task is completed and what did they achieve or where did they end with their task, right? So there would be also those kinds of mechanisms, more of what is now loosely being called the agent based framework, right? Basically a smart bot or a smart agent being sent off on a mission, if you may, right? So there is that second aspect of user interaction, which has to, again, become smooth and sort of part of the enterprise workflows. The third part also is where there is the power of AI, but in a way it's invisible. And what I mean by that is I still go search for things. I still go, sort of click through buttons. I still look at visualizations and interact with it. I'm still sort of playing with, tabular data as I have been doing over all the years. But behind the scenes, that system is taking advantage of AI. So for example, the cells or the information that are being populated, they're essentially sort of answers to my questions, but I'm not asking them as questions via a conversational interface. I'm sort of manipulating a spreadsheet, right? Or I'm manipulating a table, or I'm clicking through a chart, or clicking through a graph, or looking at relationships. So I feel like all three need to be nurtured, and that's what we've done with our system as well. And in fact, something that we're very proud of, and also our users really love, because I feel like they have had some of these systems they've played with, and it's a little difficult sometimes for users to take advantage of it. And then there's this dichotomy within companies, like, hey, do I have to actually go through a few months training before I can take advantage of even this power that a system is potentially giving me? So I think user interface is going to be very important, right? And again, I feel like the innovation there is going to become also accelerated over a period of time as the adoption increases, right? Because you might end up seeing other kinds of ways of interacting with the system, not only in terms of voice based and visual perception based and all those things which might happen in smart systems of the future, but also where there would be implicit ways of interacting with it. Like, hey, I asked it a question yesterday, the system has been busy doing some work. It gave me some things from my yesterday's question or yesterday's request, but it comes back again via a notification or a nudge or something, just like a friend would, but saying, hey, you were thinking about this yesterday. I actually found some new piece of information that you should look at, right? Or, I've gone and corrected it. I told you this yesterday, but actually it wasn't that. I went and did some further analysis. And I think this is a better way to approach it, right? Kind of, again, mimicking the human interactions down in the system. And I think all of these and more will emerge over a period of time.
I love the space of where cybersecurity and AI sit. I think this is going to be a lot of growth. That's an understatement. I think we're going to see a lot of change, and I think your product's really cool, and I think your views are very interesting. And we'll have to kind of have you come back and talk about where some of those things went down the road, because I think we're going to look back and go, some of those were probably spot on, and you guys are early, so I appreciate that. How can somebody touch base with you if they want to connect with you regarding anything you've mentioned on the show?
Yeah, the best way to get hold of us is either on LinkedIn. We seem to be active there. My handle is, of course, my name is Shashank Tiwari. You can search me up, or my handle is tshanky, tshanky. You can also just simply go to the Uno.ai page. You can look for uno.ai. It's as simple as that, a short domain, hopefully memorable. Just click through that, and you'll find most information about us. And I think those are probably the two best areas. If you still want to send us an email, we'll respond to it. You can send us at contact@uno.ai. And we try to be diligent. We try to respond to every request, every sort of touch point that we have from the community, the customers, and research, just about everybody at large. So we appreciate you getting in touch with us. Ask us more questions. And like you mentioned earlier, Amir, very exciting. Thank you for having me on this excellent podcast of yours. And yeah, there is lots to learn, and we'll be happy to come back on at some point in time and share more of the learnings of where we have landed, and what we have learned.
Absolutely. Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you again. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guests, different topic. Until then, two things. One, love the space. Shashank had some great views. Please share this with somebody else who's either interested in AI, cybersecurity, the intersection of both. I think it's a great episode for somebody to listen to. Also, like, subscribe, comment, leave a review. Let me know how the podcast is doing. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.